Hello, everyone. Today, we're looking at a paper about how we record our schedules, called Paper Notebooks versus Mobile Devices, Brain Activation Differences During Memory Retrieval. The theme is whether paper planners and smartphones lead to different brain activity when we later try to remember something. Important, think about your own smartphone for a moment. Do you ever put test dates into a calendar app, or leave plans with friends buried in a line chat?
Absolutely. I put test dates and tutoring times into my phone calendar all the time, but sometimes I suddenly realize, wait, that's today, and panic.
On the other hand, some people write things like math test or club tournament in a paper planner or notebook, and sometimes they remember where on the page they wrote it, along with the pen color or the shape of their handwriting.
That's true. When I write something in a paper notebook, I often remember it as part of the whole page, like I wrote it in red near the bottom right. But on a smartphone, the screens just scroll by, so the place where I wrote it doesn't leave as strong an impression.
That difference in impression may actually be related to how memory works inside the brain. That's the study we're introducing today. More specifically, the researchers compared paper notebooks, tablets, and smartphones to see how well people remembered schedules later and how their brains worked during recall.
Wait, just changing the tool you use can change brain activity? So writing a mock exam date in a paper planner and typing it into a smartphone calendar might lead to different memory and brain patterns?
Exactly. This study turned an everyday situation, writing down a schedule, into an experiment. Imagine reading conversations like, "Next Tuesday we have an English presentation," or "On Saturday I'm going to see a movie with a friend," and then filling those plans into a calendar.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't some difficult memory test right from the start. It was more like making a normal schedule. That's easy to picture.
One way to imagine it is this. Suppose you have your own calendar inside your head. When you write on paper and when you type on a phone, that inner calendar might be built differently. On paper, you remember the whole page scenery. On a phone, the screen scrolls and changes.
So a paper notebook is like carefully placing one photo into an album, while a smartphone is more like watching a short video slide past quickly. That difference might affect how the memory stays in our head.
That's a good comparison. This study carefully looked at whether those differences actually appear in brain activity and what kinds of differences show up in test accuracy. From here, let's go through the aim and details of the study step by step. The biggest question in this study is how the method of input, or the way we record information, changes brain activity when we later try to remember it. In technical terms, the stage of forming a memory is called encoding, and the stage of remembering it later is called retrieval.
Encoding and retrieval sound difficult, but basically they mean putting something away and taking it back out, right? It's like putting your things in a locker and coming back for them later.
Exactly. The idea is that if the way you put things into that locker differs between paper notebooks, tablets, and smartphones, then the ease of taking them out later and the parts of the brain that become active might also differ. This study especially focuses on how paper notebooks provide a lot of spatial information.
Spatial information means things like where on the page you wrote something, or the feeling that a lot of plans are gathered in the upper left, right? For example, if I write a test range on the right-hand page of my notebook, I might remember the whole layout of that page.
That's right. The researchers focused on the fact that with paper notebooks, the size of the page and the relationships between locations stay fixed. But with tablets and smartphones, scrolling and switching screens can change where things appear. They thought this might affect the amount of memory cues available.
That makes sense. With a paper textbook, I might remember that formula was near the bottom of the page. But on a smartphone screen, things move up and down, so location clues might be weaker.
The study also looked not only at test scores, but at how strongly different parts of the brain became active. These included the hippocampus, an important memory center, the precuneus, located around the middle back area of the brain, the visual cortex in the occipital lobe, and language-related areas in the frontal and parietal lobes.
That's a lot of brain areas. The hippocampus is like the brain's memory librarian. The visual cortex is like a screen inside the mind. And the language areas are like editors that organize words.
That's a nice way to summarize it. The key point of this study is that it compared how strongly these networks for memory, imagery, and language worked, depending on whether people used paper notebooks or digital devices. In other words, it didn't just ask whether paper feels easier to remember. It compared paper and digital tools under the same conditions, including brain activity.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't just about personal feelings like paper helps me focus or smartphones distract me. They actually tested it in an experiment. That's really interesting when thinking about how to study.
As a metaphor, it's like checking which switches in the brain are pressed by the notebooks and apps we use every day. Even with the same task of making a schedule, does a paper notebook press many switches at once, or is it not very different from a smartphone? This study tried to answer that question with data. Now, let's look closely at how the experiment worked. The participants were 48 people, including university students in Japan, and all of them were native speakers of Japanese. They were around 18 to 29 years old, a generation that commonly studies and manages schedules in daily life.
They were divided into 3 groups: paper notebook, tablet, and smartphone, right? And the participants were people who usually use those tools for scheduling, so it wasn't simply that someone did badly because they weren't used to the device.
Exactly. They were divided into a paper notebook group, a tablet group, and a smartphone group, with age, sex, handedness, and other conditions roughly balanced. In addition, the researchers also created a broader device group made up of people who regularly used paper planners too, and used it for another angle of analysis.
What exactly did they do in the experiment? I heard it started with reading a conversation, not with a sudden memorization test.
That's right. First, there was a conversation between 2 or 3 people. It contained about 14 specific plans, like a meeting next Wednesday or a trip on a Saturday in March. While silently reading the conversation, participants filled those plans into their own calendars.
So it's like taking information such as there's a test on this date in February, or I'm meeting a friend on this date in March, and writing it into a monthly calendar in a notebook or app. That feels very close to how we normally fill in club activities or tutoring schedules.
The tools were a paper notebook in planner size, a tablet that could be written on with a stylus, and a smartphone using flick input and Japanese character conversion. The paper notebook and tablet showed a 2-page monthly calendar spread. The smartphone, on the other hand, showed weekly screens that were switched by swiping, which created a difference in spatial layout.
So paper and tablet were like looking at a poster with the whole month laid out, while the smartphone was like sliding through a narrow strip when we get a time. The scenery left in your head really might be different.
The researchers measured how long it took participants to write down the schedules, but there was no time limit. After finishing, they reviewed the calendar for 30 seconds. Then, for 1 hour, they performed an interfering task. Inside an MRI scanner, they listened to a reading of a Japanese short story and answered questions about its content.
So they made sure the participants didn't keep thinking only about the schedule. They shifted their attention to another story. It's like when you play a game before a test and start forgetting what you studied.
After 1 hour, the main retrieval test began. Still inside the MRI scanner, participants saw 16 questions about the schedules, one by one. For example, what day was the deadline for the English assignment? Or, on which day did 2 plans overlap? They chose one answer from 4 options.
Some questions were easy, while others were a little trickier, with similar plans placed close together. After the test, they also rated how confident they were on a 4-point scale, so the researchers could check whether their confidence matched their actual answers.
As a control, they also did a short-term memory test called a 2-back task during the same session. Participants saw meaningless 3-letter words and chose whether the current word matched the one shown 2 steps earlier. This was used to measure basic memory ability, regardless of the medium.
Oh, I see. So the whole flow was write schedules, listen to another story for 1 hour, then take a schedule quiz and a short-term memory test, while the MRI scanned the brain. I like that the setup was close to everyday schedule management.
Now let's look at the results. First, the behavioral data. When the researchers compared the time it took the 3 groups to write down the schedules, a statistical test showed a significant difference. The paper notebook group finished more quickly than the tablet and smartphone groups.
So even though they were writing about the same 14 or so plants, the paper notebook group finished faster. It's like making a shopping list on paper versus using a phone memo app, and the paper version is quicker.
That's a good image, but speed alone isn't enough. The important question is whether they were rushing shallowly or processing smoothly and deeply. So the researchers carefully looked at the accuracy of the later schedule quiz. When looking at overall accuracy and reaction time, there was no large difference among the three groups.
Wait, so it doesn't mean paper notebooks are overwhelmingly easier to remember. People using smartphones and tablets also remembered reasonably well overall.
Exactly. However, when the researchers selected only the relatively easy questions and analyzed them, the paper notebook group had significantly higher accuracy than the tablet group. In other words, for questions that were easier to answer in the first place, memory from paper notebooks seemed to have a slight advantage.
Oh, I see. So the difference didn't appear mainly in the hardest questions. It was more like paper helped people avoid missing questions they should have gotten right. That would be very useful on a regular school test.
The study also showed a positive correlation between performance on the two-back task and performance on the schedule quiz. This means people with stronger short-term memory tended to do better on the schedule quiz as well. However, this was found when all three groups were combined, so it was not a difference caused by the type of medium.
So they confirmed that basic memory ability mattered, and then compared paper and digital tools on top of that. Now let's finally get into what was happening inside the brain.
When they looked at brain activity, all three groups showed increased activity in common areas while remembering the schedules. These included the hippocampus, the precuneus, the visual cortex, and language-related areas in the frontal and parietal lobes. This is thought to show that people were recalling schedules as words and also forming mental images of the calendar.
So when someone remembers a plan like club match on the first Saturday of March, the words, the date, and the image of calendar squares all appear together in the mind, and the hippocampus, visual cortex, and language network become active at once.
Then, when the researchers compared the strength of activity in this common network across the three groups, several important regions were significantly more active in the paper notebook group than in the combined tablet and smartphone groups. These included the hippocampus, the precuneus, visual-related areas in the occipital region, and language-related areas in the frontal lobe.
So while they were remembering the schedules, the paper notebook group showed stronger activity in the memory librarian, mental screen, and word editor than the digital groups. Even while answering the same kinds of questions, their brains were working in a more powerful way.
The researchers also found a positive relationship between activity in language-related areas and the reaction time for answering the quiz. This suggests that inner speech, the process of forming words in the mind, was also involved in how quickly participants answered.
So with paper notebooks, it's like the person thinks, let's see, that match was written in red on the lower left part of that page, so it must have been the first Saturday of March, tracing the calendar scenery and the words together. And the brain switches involved in that process turn on strongly.
In their interpretation, the authors suggest that the paper notebook group showed stronger activity in networks for memory, visual imagery, and language, and that they used richer memory cues. In particular, spatial cues unique to paper may have strongly activated memory networks such as the hippocampus. Finally, let's organize what this study tells us. First, it's important to note that the paper does not claim that paper notebooks always improve test scores under every condition. Overall accuracy and reaction time did not differ greatly among the three groups, and the task in this study was limited to a quiz about schedules.
Hearing that, some people might think, then smartphones are fine too. But based on the results we just saw, paper notebooks seem to have features like reducing mistakes on easy questions and strongly activating the brain's memory network.
That's right. The authors argue that paper notebooks may enrich memory cues through information such as the size and location of a real page and the physical feel of writing. It's like remembering information with a map attached, including which calendar square you wrote something in and what color you used.
For example, if I write exam dates in a paper planner, opening the page can bring back a spatial image, like this whole section is exam week. On a smartphone, the area visible on one screen is narrow, and once I scroll, the previous scene disappears, so it might be harder to build that map-like image.
Toward the end of the paper, the researchers also suggest that these results may be related to education and e-learning. As learning with tablets and computers increases, paper textbooks and notebooks may still have strengths as memory cues.
Applying this to school, typing everything from class into a tablet and writing only the important points in your own words in a paper notebook might activate different kinds and strengths of brain networks. Which is better probably depends on the content, but it gives us a useful hint for choosing how to study.
However, the paper also says that this study alone cannot prove that paper is best in every situation. This study dealt with memory for schedules over a short timescale, and more research is needed to know what happens with other subjects or long-term learning.
Oh, I see. So it's not a simple story of paper is amazing and digital is bad. It's closer to saying paper has a side that can strongly activate the brain, so let's use paper and digital tools wisely together.
For example, for things you really don't want to forget, like mock exam dates, regular test dates, or assignment deadlines, you could write them on a paper calendar too. On the other hand, you could leave small schedule changes and reminders to your smartphone. The study gives scientific support for thinking about that kind of practical balance.
As a metaphor, maybe a smartphone is like a huge warehouse where you can search instantly, while a paper notebook is like a favorite bookshelf you arranged yourself. Both are important, but if you want to remember something carefully, putting it on your own bookshelf may make it easier to take out later.
That's a good metaphor. What this study teaches us is that the tool we use is connected to how the brain forms memories and retrieves them later. When thinking about your own note-taking methods or study style, it may help to keep in mind just a little how the brain's networks might be working.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Dr. Wanko. I learned something new today and feel smarter already. See you next time. Bye.